Lions don't do this. Lions never had a lair like this. They're doing it for the pleasure.
Shh, it's the Film Flamers.
Hey guys, I'm Chris.
Hey everybody, I'm Robert.
And we're the Film Flamers. Just like last month, we're bringing you 2 deep dives this month.
That's right. So we covered The Witches of Eastwick earlier this month, and now we're going to deep dive into The Ghost and the Darkness.
Thank you.
I know. I mean, so apparently, listeners, I've been living a lie since this movie was released because I have always called it The Ghost in the Darkness. Like the ghost in the shell.
And that's just not right.
That's wrong.
So,
it's just wrong.
That's appalling.
I mean, and you'd think that I would have discovered this earlier on because Chris sent me a message and said, hey, we should cover this movie. And I'm like, well, let's do it now, right? I started looking it up. I started making notes and I was writing The Ghost in the Darkness on everything. And then today I tried to type that into Google and nothing was working for me and I couldn't figure it out. I just was like, oh my gosh, this is the wrong title of this movie.
It didn't even say, did you mean The Ghost and the Darkness?
No, Google was nice enough to not point out my stupidity this time.
Okay.
I'm glad that I've been corrected now and it actually makes a whole lot more sense.
The Ghost in the Darkness is a 1996 American historical adventure film directed by Stephen Hopkins and starring Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas. The story is a fictionalized account of the Tsavo man-eaters, 2 lions that attacked and killed workers in Tsavo, Kenya during the construction of the Uganda-Mombasa Railway in East Africa in 1898.
The film features a musical score by Jerry Goldsmith, and the screenplay was written by William Goldman, based on The Man-Eaters of Tsavo, a book published in 1907 by Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson, the man who actually hunted and killed both lions. Goldman first heard of the story while traveling through Africa in 1984, and later pitched the idea to Paramount in 1989 as a cross between Jaws and Lawrence of Arabia. He was commissioned to write the screenplay, which he delivered in 1990. My particular feeling is that they were evil, Goldman said of the lions. I believe that for 9 months, evil popped out of the ground at Tsavo.
But before we get too deep into the jungle, this is The Ghost in the Darkness.
Oh my God. Holy. Lions don't do this. Lions never had a lair like this. They're doing it for the pleasure.
They are not lions. They are the ghost and the darkness.
We're in a race, Colonel, and the prize is the continent of Africa.
We are building the most expensive and daring railroad in history for the glorious purpose of saving Africa from the Africans and, of course, to end slavery.
How many do you think they've killed? 100. Maybe more.
Do we wish the world to think that the builders of the British Empire are afraid because of a few minor difficulties with the local wildlife?
Are you sure this was a lion?
I'm going to locate Remington. I assume you've heard of him.
Already! Now, do you see a problem with that?
Actually, no.
Let's go after them.
Get him back! The devil has come to Tsavo!
I am the devil.
Yeah!
Stay out of my way.
You're a rather cheerful fellow when you get to know you. You don't enjoy killing, do you?
Then why do it? Because I've got a gift.
Shoot him!
Michael Douglas, Val Kilmer, The Ghost and the Darkness.
Now, can you control your fear? Can you?
In 1898, Sir Robert Beaumont, the primary financier of a railroad project in Tsavo, Kenya, played by Tom Wilkinson, is furious because the project is running behind schedule. He seeks out the expertise of Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson, a British military engineer, played by Val Kilmer, to get the project back on track. Patterson travels from England to Savo, telling his wife Helena that he'll complete the project and be back in London before the birth of their son. Upon arrival in Savo, Patterson meets British supervisor Angus Starling, Kenyan foreman Samuel, played by John Canny, and Dr. David Hawthorne, played by Bernard Hill. Dr. Hawthorne tells Patterson of a recent lion attack that has affected the project and struck fear into the hearts of the workers. That night, Patterson kills an approaching lion with one shot, earning the respect of the workers and bringing the project back on schedule. However, not long afterwards, Mahina, the construction foreman, is dragged from his tent in the middle of the night. His half-eaten body is found the next morning. Patterson then attempts a second nighttime lion hunt, but the following morning, another worker is found dead at the opposite end of the camp from Patterson's position. Patterson's only comfort now is the letters he receives from his wife. While the workers are gathering wood and building fire pits around the tents, a lion attacks the camp in the middle of the day, killing another worker. While Patterson, Starling, and Samuel are tracking it to one end of the camp, another lion leaps upon them from the roof of a nearby building, killing Starling with a slash to the throat and injuring Patterson's arm. Despite his efforts to kill them, both lions escape. Samuel, the Kenyan foreman, states that there has never been a pair of man-eaters before. Lions have always been solitary hunters. The workers, led by the Indian supervisor Abdullah, begin to turn on Patterson, and work on the bridge comes to a halt. Patterson requests soldiers from England to protect the workers, but is denied. During a visit to the camp, Sir Beaumont tells Patterson that he will ruin his reputation if the bridge is not finished on time, and that he'll contact the famous hunter Charles Remington to help because Patterson has so far been unable to kill the lions, or as he states it, a minor issue with the local wildlife.
That man's such a fucking prick. I mean,
I know.
God.
Remington, played by Michael Douglas, arrives with skilled Maasai warriors to help hunt and kill the lions. They dub the lions the Ghost and the Darkness because of their notorious methods of attack. The initial attempt fails when Patterson's borrowed gun misfires. The warriors decide to leave, but Remington stays behind. After finding lion prints by the camp hospital, Remington orders the construction of a new hospital for the sick and injured workers to move to, and tempts the lions to the now abandoned hospital with animal parts and blood. When the lions seemingly fall for the trap, Remington and Patterson shoot at them, but the lions circle back and attack the new hospital, killing many patients as well as Dr. Hawthorne. This devastating attack causes Abdullah and the construction workers to leave, and only Patterson, Remington, and Samuel remain behind. Patterson and Remington locate the animal's lair, discovering the bones of dozens of the lion's victims, leading Remington to the realization that the lions are killing many of their victims for pleasure, something he has never seen or heard of before. That night, Remington finally kills one of the lions by using Patterson and a baboon as bait. Afterwards, Remington, Patterson, and Samuel spend the evening drinking and celebrating. In his sleep, Patterson dreams that his wife and newborn child have arrived in Savo, only to watch helplessly as the remaining lion leaps from the brush and kills them. Awakened by the shock of his nightmare, he finds that the remaining lion has slaughtered Remington as he and Samuel slept. After the two men cremate Remington, they burn the tall grass surrounding the camp, driving the surviving lion toward the camp in order to ambush him. The lion attacks them on the partially constructed bridge, and after a harrowing fight, Patterson finally kills it. With both lions finally killed, Abdullah and the construction workers return, and the bridge is completed on time. Patterson reunites with his wife and meets his newborn son for the first time.
The end.
End.
End. The ghost and
in the end.
The darkness. Ew. Yeah, we got a lot of things to talk about for this movie, but first, The Ghost and the Darkness was filmed on location at the Songam Game Reserve in South Africa. The shoot proved to be rather difficult. After filming, director Stephen Hopkins said of the shoot, "We had snake bites, scorpion bites, tick bite fever, people getting hit by lightning, floods, torrential rains and lightning storms, hippos chasing people through the water, cars getting swept into the water, and several deaths of crew members, including 2 drownings.
Jesus.
I know. Val came to set under the worst conditions imaginable. He was completely exhausted from doing The Island of Dr. Moreau. He was dealing with unfavorable publicity from that set. He was going through a divorce. He had barely had time to get his teeth into this role before we started, and he's in nearly every scene in the movie. But I worked him 6 or 7 days a week for 4 months under really adverse conditions, and he really came through. He had a passion for this film.
I've heard that because there's like nightmare stories from the Island of Dr. Moreau, right? And that's with
Marlon Brando? Yeah.
Marlon Brando is like notoriously bad, you know,
I have
to have
completely
on set.
like taken that movie out of my mind. You know what I mean? It's not good.
No, it's not. And even he was like, Val Kilmer's a nightmare. And yet he immediately goes to this shoot and he's going through all that stuff. And apparently he was like a dream to work with. So I don't know, maybe he like learned, you know, but
no, I mean, yeah, because at the time, Val Kilmer, to me, hadn't been in all that many movies. What, like Top Gun and Tombstone even came later, didn't it?
No, I don't think so. Well, yeah, he was a household name at this point. I mean, he had been, I think he got famous in all of these. I don't think maybe Batman was maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
But all of these were like in the middle of this whole thing. And I think Tombstone came out earlier, like 1992 or something, or 1993.
Yeah, I think you may be right, because Batman definitely came out before Ghost in the Darkness.
Because that basically launched his career. Mm-hmm. You know, he had a career before that, but it launched him into this massive stardom because he did so well on Tombstone.
And God help me, I love Batman Forever. So, I mean, I think it's good.
I haven't seen that movie in years.
It's a fun ride.
Okay. So yeah, apparently, you know, he was well liked on the set because he had always, you know, loved Africa, I guess, and he'd wanted to do a movie there, you know, and he had just come off this nightmare set with this gigantic ego and Marlon Brando. And of course, Marlon Brando hated Val Kilmer and the director hated Val Kilmer and everything was kind of going to shit. And so I guess when they started this movie, all was just like ready to have a good time. So he did some work.
But I mean, so that entire quote, though, if you're shooting on location in Africa, you have to expect some of these things. Snake bites, scorpion bites, hippos, whatever. I mean, like...
but that's a lot. Like lightning and drownings and snake bites and tick bites and, you know, being chased by the wildlife and everything else. But
it's almost like a cursed movie, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know, right?
I don't know. But yeah, the director said it was just the nightmare of his career. But the movie was released on October 11th, 1996, alongside The Long Kiss Goodnight. I love that movie.
I haven't seen it.
And what?
I know.
Ghost in the Darkness debuted at number 1, making more than $10 million in its first weekend. Ultimately, it would gross $75 million against a budget of $55 million. So who knows? Depending on the marketing that they did, if they made any money. I'm sure it's made money in a lot of the distribution since then.
I mean, I would call any movie that grosses $75 million at the box office a hit. You know, I mean, against that kind of a budget for sure. So
I can't even imagine making this movie, like, let alone all those problems. But I just remember in like half of these scenes, there's hundreds of extras.
Yep.
Like, what a nightmare. What a nightmare the shoot must have been. And they're all supposed to be doing stuff and constructing things. And man.
There really is a lot going on in the background besides like the Serengeti, you know?
And then you've got trained fucking lions that you're trying to pull around set with all these extras and everything else.
I don't know what he was thinking. Was he thinking it was going to be like a sail, you know, like, oh, this is going to be so easy.
I don't think anyone thought it was going to be easy, but I'm sure they didn't expect, all of the trouble that they got outside of that.
Oof. So The Ghost in the Darkness has a 51% rating on Rotten Tomatoes with a consensus that states The Ghost in the Darkness hits its target as a suspenseful adventure, but it falls into a trap of its own making whenever it reaches for supernatural profundity. The audience score is much higher, however, at 75%.
I wonder what they mean by supernatural profundity, trying to like say that the lions, just like the locals saying that the lions were supernatural. It never tried to sell the audience on that.
No, but I mean, there was a lot of talk of like superstition and things like that. And like, I never thought that those lions were anything more than lions, but yeah. So that consensus kind of baffles me a little bit, but hey.
Roger Ebert said the film was so awful that it lacked the usual charm of being so bad it's funny, adding it was an African adventure that makes the Tarzan movies look subtle and realistic.
That's pretty scathing. Conversely, David Ellis listed this film at number 8 on his top 10 animal horror movies countdown. I can see that.
It won an Academy Award for Best Sound Editing, and also Val Kilmer was nominated for the Razzie Award for Worst Supporting Actor.
Yeah, I have things to say about that, so I'm sure that'll come up later on in the conversation.
Yeah.
So
let's talk about that reception a little bit. I think this movie came out at like a weird time, and they marketed it, I feel like, as like a historical drama, like in an adventure film, and I guess it kind of is. Obviously, this is kind of another genre-bending movie, right? It's, at parts it's very horror film, at other parts it's not, and like any movie, there's a lot of gray area, but I'm not sure they knew how to market this. And it also came out at a weird time because it was contrasted with The English Patient, which is another historical drama, which won the Best Picture that year. And of course, they didn't try and sell it as based on a true story, especially given some of the happenings that beggar belief in the film. I mean, as you saw from Roger Ebert's review saying all of it's unbelievable, Tarzan's more believable.
I mean, I think a lot of it does boil down to marketing, because I was unsure whether or not I had seen this movie, right? Chris and I had talked about it. I'm like, I can't remember if I've seen it or not. I'm going to go with probably not. And as I was watching it for the podcast, I can definitely say I have never seen this movie at all. I mean, it was released at a time when I was going to the theater regularly to see whatever was playing, right? I mean, in 1996, I was 17 years old, driving around town, just going to the movies. And I mean, I think I probably saw Jerry Maguire like 10 times in the theater, which is probably why I didn't see Ghost in the Darkness. But I mean, so it was lost on me. And I know that people liked it because I worked at a video store at the time and it was rented a lot. Yeah. My parents love this movie. My father, especially. When I told him we were doing it for the podcast, he was super excited. He's like, "Oh, I love that movie. I just love it." And I'm like, "My God, how did I miss it?"
Yeah, I don't think it's very well known, actually.
Yeah, I don't think that a lot of people have seen this movie. And that's kind of sad because it's not terrible. I think Roger Ebert sort of missed the bar on his review. So
yeah, I think it's underrated. I don't think they sold it right. And even though there's dialogue in the film talking about like this or that actually happened, this or that, is part of like the legacy of this as far as like what the locals said was supernatural or whatever. So we'll be getting to a little bit to the actual history of what, was supposed to happen that this is based off of a little bit later. But let's start talking a little bit about the characters.
Yeah. So let's start with Val Kilmer, because unlike the Razzies, how do they call him a supporting actor in this movie? He's in every fucking scene. He's the main character of the movie.
Michael Douglas got top billing, even though he doesn't appear until halfway through the movie. And I mean, like, if you're going to compare the two actors in this movie, I don't think that Val Kilmer should have been the one getting the Razzie. Right? Yeah. No, he started off in the beginning kind of bad, in my opinion. And it's like, this is a guy that can do any accent in the world. And what the fuck is this Irish accent he's supposed to be doing? Like, I don't understand.
Oh my God, that is all over my notes. I was like, he's super handsome, but that accent though? I'm like,
well, he went on to do The Saint, and he can do like every accent there, like perfectly, and he's well known to be like a chameleon actor, but he just didn't do that here. And I wonder if that was like something that he was directed to do, make it slight. Meanwhile, he's standing right next to a guy that's actually doing an Irish accent because he's Irish, so I don't know.
Well, and to me, I'm not saying that Val Kilmer's performance in this was top notch.
No,
right?
But he got better and better as the movie went through, I think.
Yes. And I mean, like, I think that his character was believable enough for me, right? However, that accent, like, it seemed to come and go whenever he pleased or whatever. And I was just like, okay, like, if you just either try to do it and do it bad or just don't do it at all, which is what half the movie seemed to me. It seemed to me mostly he was just talking like an American saying I instead of yes, Mm-hmm. But I mean, like, I don't think he was that bad in this movie. I kind of liked him in this movie.
No, he was fine. He was serviceable.
He did a good job presenting himself as a patriot, but also someone who like loved other countries, and to me had a very like noble sense of like he was there to do a job that was part of colonialism, but I'm not even quite sure that he really subscribed to colonialism itself, right? Does that make sense? Maybe I'm just reading too much into that character.
He viewed himself as someone who builds bridges, quite literally, right?
Yes, exactly.
And he really wanted to see the world, and it takes him all over the world to do his job, and he really loves that part of his job. and you can tell that his wife, understands that and they accept it, and that's just part of their lives.
I mean, let's face it, Val Kilmer is kind of an action star, right? I mean, that's what he was known for mostly, right? And this is kind of an action-y movie, and he does a good job in it. Like, he's believable to me as a bridge builder and a hunter at the same time, right? And if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, and he was known as a hunter, but not like an African game hunter, right? So he's not experienced at all in that type of hunting. And he got lucky that first night when he killed the lion that had nothing to do with the actual lions that were the problem, but how were they to know that?
And that sort of leads into the next like major character, which would be Remington, played by Michael Douglas, right?
Yeah. So this role was originally offered to Sean Connery and Anthony Hopkins, both of whom declined. But executive producer Michael Douglas stepped into the last minute to play the part.
Well, of course he did.
Yeah. And then apparently later on edited the film and edited whole sections out of the film in order to make his role seem larger, even though he doesn't show up. Yeah.
He's so fucking crazy in this movie. That was the first note that I wrote when his character showed up. I was like, okay, so Michael Douglas is crazy. I'm like, I don't know. I sort of expect when a big game hunter shows up on the scene, I don't expect him to crack so much wise, And so I was I think I was expecting a very serious character from him in this movie. Yeah. And it's not what I got. And I was thrown for a loop. I was just like, this is not what I was expecting at all.
Well, he shows up like a Deus Ex Machina, right? Abdullah and the workers are all about to turn on Patterson. And he just shows up with a gun to Abdullah's head and be like, you need to back off. I'm the devil, And it's just like, okay, what? I feel like Val Kilmer was taking like more and more and more responsibility and stress and control over the situation as he went on. And then there's like this massive tonal shift as soon as Michael Douglas, shows up, and Val Kilmer almost quite literally has to like step back, and let Michael Douglas do his thing for at least, 45 minutes or something.
I didn't dislike the character, right? It just wasn't what I was expecting for the most part.
I don't know that we needed him because like Samuel and some of the other like African actors were kind of doing that role of being the more knowledgeable people about,
right,
the landscape and everything else. But it's like this character was brought in for like a more like American perspective on things, like the American bravado.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, they're trying to sell this movie to American audiences. It's being made by an American studio, by an American director and American writer.
Yeah.
I assume Wayne Goldman is American, but
it doesn't look.
I mean, they have to have that. I mean, even in a period movie, if they're going to sell this as an adventure film or something, I mean, they're going to have that sort of American thing. I mean, from someone who hadn't seen the movie, I didn't know that he was an American character before watching it, right?
Well, they didn't have to do that. I mean, they kind of Americanized Val Kilmer's character so much that you almost didn't need that,
Yeah, he almost wasn't British at all.
He was obviously a good enough hunter, even in the confines of this film and the writing of this film. He created that trap, which is not something we talked about in the synopsis, but that's a whole thing, and we'll talk about some specific scenes later. But I do want to mention some of the other characters, like Dr. David Hawthorne, played by Bernard Hill. Later, the only other thing I really know him from was Lord of the Rings. He was like the king of Rohan, Theoden. Of course, Tom Wilkinson as Sir Robert Beaumont. He was fun. Of course, he totally nails being a complete asshole prick douche.
Yes. I mean, like, he was such a good prick in this movie. I was like, that's amazing. I really like the supporting characters in this movie supporting acting. So huge. Yeah, those two are great. But I mean, I think that once we get to like the site, right, we're really given some really good characters. So.
Well, yeah, Samuel is the Kenyan foreman, was played by John Canny, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right, but he did a superb job, and he was kind of just like the wise, person the entire movie through. Always kept his cool and kind of, supported and helped him, get through all of it emotionally and quite literally physically too.
He was the bridge in like human form. I mean, so like he spoke every single language that needed to be spoke on that job site. He went and like intermingled with everybody from like the higher ups to the people doing all the laboring work. And he knew about lions. He knew about other cultures. He literally was the bridge in this movie. And it just really struck me as that, like, and by far, he was my favorite character in this movie.
Yeah, I really liked him too. I loved seeing Puri as Abdullah. He's the Indian lead worker. He did a really good job. And there's like, it doesn't make anyone into like a straw man except for maybe Tom Wilkinson. Yeah. And like, Puri is the one that like leads the workers kind of revolt against Patterson, but they have this understanding at the beginning and the end of the film that is actually quite nice to see. One of my favorite smallest characters in this movie was Mahina, played by Henry Seal or Selly. I don't know how to pronounce it, but he was a construction foreman. He was the first one to die, but he is like almost the best pure horror moment where he's staring out at the waving grasses, you know, in the bush, and he kind of sees the hint of a lion watching them, and you can see his reaction. And then he's the first one that's pulled from the tents and killed, and he's the first on-screen victim. And I do want to talk about like the screenplay for this movie later on, and maybe its construction a little bit, but yeah, you're right. That's like the first real like horror moment in this movie is when that character dies. And I kind of saw it coming a little bit because they're having that conversation earlier, and he's like, well, I've killed a lion too. And you with
know,
my hands,
how many shots? And he's like, with my hands. And I was like, oh, you'll be the first one to die. Hubris, sir. But then like right after that, you know, like he and Val Kilmer have like sort of bonded over killing a lion. And there's this scene where they're like building the bridge, and it's really like rough manual labor. And he's standing there with his shirt off. And I was like, my God, that man is ripped. I was just like, Jesus, of course you killed a lion with your bare hands.
No, I really appreciated a lot of the characters. It's a really good example of no small part.
Yeah.
In this film, because there's a lot of side characters, and they all do their job. They all pull their weight. They all are there for a reason. Mm-hmm. And you can tell that they all, you know, deeply care about their role in either in the film or in the story, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I could see from the caliber of acting in this that they wanted to do a good job. I think that they really appreciated the role that was given to them, you know, and we talk about things like no small parts or whatever. And I you know, William Goldman is really good about crafting a screenplay like that with lots of different characters that are incredibly memorable, you know? And I mean, we can't forget like characters in a Goldman screenplay, you know, especially things like The Princess Bride or like Butch Cassidy, right? I mean, like those movies are great, and he's really, really good at creating a world filled with people, right? He's just that kind of a writer, and I appreciate the hell out of that.
Now, this is really a boys' movie, right? There's only one woman in this entire movie, and it's Helena, played by Emily Mortimer, which is her first ever role in a movie, I believe. Her first screen appearance. Really? Yeah. She, of course, went on to do like Shutter Island, and she was in Newsroom on HBO. And she's been in like Hugo and Mary Poppins Returns. She's been in a lot.
Yeah, she's been lots and lots of British like TV and film.
Yeah. But yeah, this is, I believe, her first film role, which is like interesting. But anyway, she has kind of a bit part. She's at the beginning, and she's in a dream, and then she's at the end. But she does her, you know, she does well considering the little that she's given. She's supposed to be like an emotional anchor, I guess, you know, for our main character, Val Kilmer's Patterson.
And really does provide like one of the most like shocking
harrowing scenes. Yeah,
that we'll get to, very soon. So why don't we talk about like some of these like key scenes in The Ghost in the Darkness?
So I hadn't seen this film in like 15 years, right? And so I was just struck kind of by the opening credits and the vibe that was going on. And they didn't start it with like the soundtrack starts with like the Savo theme, which is like kind of playful and African and, you know, and kind of out of Africa-y. And which is a beautiful score. I love the score for this film. I'm just going to say Jerry Goldsmith's 90s scores are all really, really good. It's like his best time. This score in particular, I'd completely forgotten about, but it really has, it has like this scary, like lion theme. It has an African theme. And it has like an interesting, like horror and action motif in there too. And it's really, really, really worth a listen. It's hard to get. I couldn't find it on Google Play, but it's on YouTube. But anyway, so the opening credit starts with this horror kind of vibe, right? It's all dark and it has this like horror score to it. And I was kind of taken aback by that. I was like, I remember this being kind of horror adjacent, but I didn't know they were really going to kind of sell that in a lot of different scenes, starting with the opening credits. So,
and I mean, I have to agree. I think that I was hoping for a lot of horror adjacency, right? Because I really didn't know what I was getting into. I knew that they were like man-eating lions, but I didn't know like how long the movie was going to progress until we got to see those lions. And we never really get to see those lions. But I mean, like,
we do though.
Yeah, I mean, like later on, but they really frame the way those lions are depicted, like sort of in the beginning, right? Everything is like hidden and quiet and in the grass, and they come from nowhere.
Yeah,
right?
and it does that first scene, the lion in the grass, where he's like staring out at the tall grasses out in the, I guess, the hills or whatever, the prairie of Africa. I don't know what to call it.
They call it the Serengeti.
The bush, right? And
the full bush.
Yes. And you can kind of see a hint, and the guy like knows that something's watching them. And that's kind of the first kind of almost like Roy Scheider, like Jaws moment of the movie. Mm-hmm. I feel like it's like, I was like, wow, that they really went for it there. And it's a subtle scene, and I really liked it.
It is. It's a very subtle scene when it comes to like horror and like making you feel terrified watching it, because I was terrified watching that scene. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And because we've spent the greater chunk of the first like 15, 20 minutes of this movie, like getting to know the characters and them traveling by train through Africa with all this like chipper African drum music playing in the background. And then like it's nighttime. He's already killed a lion, mm-hmm. right? And then all of a sudden you're like, bam, like the lion comes and drags that man through the grass. And I was like, what the fuck? Like,
yeah.
Oh my God.
No, I do have to go back a little bit, because he did kill that lion and everyone's like celebrating. And I was just like, wouldn't it be funny if it was just like end credits right here?
The end.
The end.
The movie's called One Shot.
No, but yeah, you're right. Like it does set it up. You're like, oh, he didn't actually kill the right lion, you know, and it's not until later that you realize it's two lions. And they did that actually really well, you know, where like they're heading off towards like where they hear the lion attacking, and then there's another lion on the roof that like literally jumps down on them. Yes. And kills one of them, slashing the throat of actually a really good character too.
And that, yeah, I mean, I did like that character quite a bit. And I was sad when he was dead, because they sort of like discovered the body after the fact, right? During that whole that scene where the lions are attacking them, and it was good. It was it was a well directed moment, right? Because I didn't even notice that Val Kilmer had gotten injured. It happened so quickly and so fast. And I really enjoy movies, especially horror movies, when you can't really see everything of what's coming after you, right? Some of it's very secret, and that's what's really scary, right?
Well, they definitely did it in like jump cuts and to make it a little bit more visceral. And it kind of did put you in the moment, because it's like if you just see the lion on the roof, next thing you know, it's pouncing on you, and then it's like running off. Mm-hmm. And then you see the aftermath. And I was like, this is probably as close to the, you know, like an actual event of this happening, like on camera, that you could get, you know, in like a storytelling kind of way on film. And it was
super effective.
Yeah.
I mean, because they really ramped up those lions kills until we get to Remington showing up, you know, in the movie.
Yeah. And his first big thing, I would say, you know, is he's trying to do, well, I guess his first big thing is the hunt with his like helpers, the Maasai warriors,
right?
Which they kind of fuck up because of the whole gun not going off. You know, and I guess the warriors like, no, we're like one time only, so we're all going to leave. That didn't really make sense to me, all those warriors leaving, but
yeah, they like took the time to come with him all the way. And then like Val Kilmer has that one little fuck up, and they're like, oh, this isn't what we signed up for. These lions are not like real lions, you know, so we're going to peace out.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the smartest thing to do. I mean,
maybe, I don't know, but we didn't get to really see them in their, you know, in their glory of actually like making a kill, which I would have loved to see, but you know, whatever. Then we get the hospital massacre, which I thought was really well done, because he sees the paw prints outside of the hospital. He's like, no, they're sitting ducks. So he moves them all smartly. Mm-hmm. And so they just drench this fucking building in buckets of blood and like all these flesh parts of animals, to really double down and get the lions to get there so they can shoot them from inside. Right. And the lions do come. But as soon as they start shooting, the lions double back and go to the new hospital and just fucking massacre people.
Yeah. And that is like, this is the time that they really start to vilify these lions in this movie, like hardcore.
Yeah.
Because those lions are going at it with all those people. I mean, it's just like some sort of buffet. for them. And I think the only other time that I thought that like they were really ramping up the villainous qualities of these animals was when they were inside that boxcar trap.
Oh, the boxcar trap, right? Yeah, because like the and maybe that's part of like one of these mini scenes are almost completely unbelievable. And then that boxcar scene, they're both like three people with guns are shooting at this thing that they did trap in the boxcar, and they don't manage to hit it once, and then it breaks the fuck out.
Yeah. And it's just like they're shooting a gun. It's bouncing off of things. They're scared. It's obviously a really mean lion, you know? And so, I mean, that starts the villainous aspects of the animals. And then once you get to that hospital massacre, like these animals, quite frankly, are like the actual villains of this movie in a way that, you know, other animal horror movies have done. Things like Jaws, right? Or things like Backcountry and, or like Day of the Animals. A whole number of things, right? But, you know, they sort of like crossed the line into horror right then, I think. Right at that hospital massacre scene is when it became a horror movie.
Yeah. And there was definite horror scenes before that, but the whole movie shifts into that horror movie, like complete mode at this point. The Lion's Den, where they actually go into the cave and they see all of the skeletons. And maybe that's really why this is like the key scene for Michael Douglas's character, I think, is because they needed like an expert, a lion hunter per se, I guess, to say, this is not what lions do. And he was shocked and he played it really well. And he's like, this is not normal. This is something like they're doing it for pleasure. They're not hunting us for food.
And I think that this is Michael Douglas's best scene in the movie, right?
Yeah, it's his most subtle performance. Yeah,
he really sells that like scared quality in his face, right? Because it's dark in there, and even I wasn't quite sure of what's going on. And then when you start like realize exactly where they're at, and just the sheer amount of bones and things in there, and I was like, this is incredible. I was like, this really is a top-notch animal horror movie, because you have to have a scene like that. Like, I mean, I've already been talking about how they try to like vilify the animals as much as possible, but this is like the cherry on top of the villainous cake, you know? It's like, not only have they killed, you know, gobbledygillion people from this work site, but who knows where else they're getting all these bodies from, because it's a lot of bones in there.
They also did a little bit of subtle visual storytelling that I hadn't remembered, and they kind of show with their torches or whatever they have in there, their lanterns, that there's cave paintings, right? And that the lions have taken over this cave, that it used to be an actual, you know, safe place for men. And you see the cave paintings of people hunting animals and stuff on the walls, and it's the lions that live there now. And I thought that was some cool visual storytelling that they don't even mention.
Oh my God, I totally missed that. I didn't see any of that. And that is amazing. Yeah. That adds a whole other level to this, right? Oh my God, that's great. I love that they have just taken over man. And I mean, and that's just, I mean, it's part of this movie anyway. Like there's so much going on within the story of this movie. Like the one thing that really struck me while I was watching it is that this movie has every single kind of like narrative conflict in it. And you rarely ever see that, especially in like horror movies or horror adjacent movies, right? So we have like the basics, like man versus man, man versus nature, man versus himself, man versus society, right? They're all packed into this one movie. And so for a very simple story, it's incredibly effective, and it has everything that you could possibly need narratively.
And it doesn't feel overstuffed.
No, it doesn't. And it's very effective in the way that it does it. Right. But we can't talk about this movie and not talk about the number one horror scene in it.
So they've already killed one lion, you know, and they're all like, they celebrate around the campfire. And so all of a sudden you're in daytime and the work is resumed, and you see that Patterson's wife and newborn son have arrived on the train. And then he's trying to get towards them through the throngs of workers. And then you see a lion in the brush kind of moving around. And Val Kilmer finally notices him. And then, like, shocking kind of way, the lion just leaps out from the brush and lands on top of, like, just fucking slams into his wife and baby. And you can see, like, blood just, like, flying and stuff. And, like, my God.
So I shrieked out loud. And, I mean, I shrieked out loud, like, 2 or 3 times in this movie, right? Yeah. Once was when he was sitting on that trap that he had built, like the big one that was standing on those pier beams or whatever, and that owl comes out and like scares him. Like that scared the shit out of me. And then the owl makes another appearance, and I was like, this fucking owl. And then like this scene where that lion just jumps up there and just like mauls his wife and child. I was like, my God, you know, and I knew deep down it had to have been a dream. I was like, this movie is not going to take this turn, really.
Yeah.
But that's a shocking fucking moment in this movie. And they like make it a point to like the baby's dressed in white, the woman is dressed in white. And the first thing I think is like, why are you wearing that white ass dress to the like out there? I was like, it's just gonna get dirty.
Yeah.
You can't buy something in brown. And then she's mauled to death. I was just like, my God.
Oh man, it was hard to watch. And actually, you know, they're not shy about kind of showing. They actually show the lions peeling skin off of people in this movie, and it's like, ooh, they don't show the full gore of the bodies and things like that. And I think that was a good choice because I feel like what they show is enough. You know, and they show like if the lion had dragged out a body or a victim into the brush, that there's a huge just blood trail, you know, and like there's a whole, you know, mess of grass that's just blood red now because of the, you know, the carnage. And they show all that.
Yeah. I mean, especially like when Michael Douglas's character has died. Right.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, like they follow the blood trail out to the tall grass. Right. And I mean, the grass is red, like in a huge area. I mean, it's like you don't have to have all the gore. You don't have to have all of it. It's very subtle in its horror. And I think that is perfect for the marketing of this movie too, because they have to like do a fine line of how they're going to do this movie. If it's going to be super gory, it's going to have to be a horror movie, but they have it just enough to where they could have it be like some period historical adventure. Right.
Mm-hmm. But then he wakes up from that nightmare only to discover that Remington has actually been killed in their, you know, drunken sleep.
Where do they get all that champagne in the middle?
I don't know. They were like drinking straight out of the bottle, like popping bottles.
And was it cold?
Probably not.
I mean, yeah. So if I ever travel to Africa, I'm going to have to make sure I chill my champagne first, because obviously there was no ice in that camp.
I love that that's your takeaway.
This is my takeaway from The Ghost in the Darkness. I was like, that champagne is probably warm and I'll have none of that, Michael Douglas.
So now that we've talked about our scenes, let's talk about the overall, and we kind of have talked about the look and feel and music, but I feel like this film is actually really surprisingly effective with its cinematography and its music and its overall tone. I feel like it does a really, really good job of kind of trying to strike this, you know, African adventure, out of Africa, Lawrence of Arabia thing, but then really getting sucked into this horror movie and really kind of doubling down on that with the tone. And I feel like it's done masterfully by Jerry Goldsmith's score. And I feel like it's done overall really, really well, pacing wise from the direction.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. I mean, I had some problems with the score, mostly because we're doing this as a horror podcast, right? And so when I watch a movie for the podcast, I sort of expected there to be some horror elements, right? And, you know, for the first half of the movie, the music was very jaunty, and I was just like, okay, so how horror adjacent is it going to be? But as the movie progressed and the score got even more like horror-esque, I was completely surprised by it, and it really affects the tone of the movie. The movie takes a hard, sharp turn from some adventure film into like animal horror, nature horror.
Yeah.
And it's super effective because of those things. And I think in large part, I have to give this, you know, respect to William Goldman for this. I think that we already know that he creates good screenplays and novels, but I think that he really did a good job with the story of this. He took a large story and really compressed it into what we needed to see to experience the kind of movie that we want. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, I mean, like the people who want to see an African adventure are going to take away that particular aspect of it. The people who want to see a horror movie are going to remember all the horror elements. And the people who want to see like a period piece about colonialism and building a bridge between cultures are going to take that away from it. And I think that's incredibly amazing that he could put all of this thing into one screenplay. And I'm kind of surprised that people didn't like grasp onto it.
Well, I think this is part of the 90s horror ghetto, you know? Yeah. And, you know, like Jaws didn't try and pass it itself off as like an ocean adventure, you know? It doubled down on the fact that it's a horror movie, really.
Right.
You know, even though people sometimes don't think of it as one, they just think of it as Jaws, you know? But I feel like when you try and trick people into thinking that you're like a historical period adventure film, they're going to come and see a horror and they may not be prepared for that, and they're looking for a drama and they just walked out of the English Patient. They watch this thing and it's not going to be what they expected or wanted, and so you set it up for that. Roger Ebert did not walk into this film thinking it was supposed to be a historical, or like a horror movie. He expected something a lot more highfalutin,
Well, and this is why I did not see this movie. So it dawned on me while I was watching it. I was like, why? Why in the, 20 years plus have I not watched this movie? And I think it's because when it was marketed to me as a moviegoer, I thought it was a historical period action adventure movie. And that really wasn't on the top of my list of things to see.
Yeah.
Right. And the 90s were rife with like British period pieces. And a lot of them were very, very good, but after a while, there has to be some sort of fatigue for that. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think this movie was marketed as even that, I think that it really boils down to like, they didn't know which direction to take this movie. Right. And it affected me. I didn't see it. And so, I mean, like,
and in all fairness, it does kind of defy genre expectations, kind of like Witches of Eastwick a little bit.
Yes.
Now, Witches of Eastwick kind of does it to a fault in a way versus this one. It's kind of inescapable because it's historic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, instead of my normal like fun facts section, I would like to, I do have a couple of fun facts as part of this, but I'd like to talk a lot about like this historical accuracy.
Well, that's good because I know nothing about this actual story.
Okay. So first of all, I have to say that this film is shockingly historically accurate.
Okay.
Which is so I came across like the Man-Eaters of Tsavo, which is like the book, and then like historians like takes on that and like all the wikis on it. And that's what made me want to watch this movie again and cover it because I was just blown away. Right. So this movie is set in 1898 at the height of Europe's scramble for Africa. And this is like the true story of how, of Great Britain's attempts to build a bridge across the River Tsavo was brought to a standstill by those man-eating lions. And for almost a year, they stalked the campsites and were reportedly responsible for the deaths of 135 victims. Right. And so all of that we kind of know from the movie.
Let me just stop for 1 second because another criticism I have about this movie is I didn't understand like the passage of time. Right.
Yeah. He says like, do it in 3 months. And then it was like 4 months later. And he's like, oh, I can bring it back on schedule. And it's like, what? You're supposed to do it in, like, yeah, they weren't quite clear with the time.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, like all these people are dead. And I was just like, okay. I was like, I could have used a little help with like the passage of time in the movie, but that's a very small critique that particular fact brought up. So
yeah, it brought me out of it a little bit too. So you're not alone. But
okay, good.
So Colonel John Patterson, a British Army engineer tasked with building the bridge, spent 10 months trying to hunt down these unstoppable monsters. The terrified locals didn't actually think they were lions at all, but demons that they called the Ghost and the Darkness. So anyway, by building this railway, British influence would have been felt through the entire continent, right? So all of, basically all the way from Lake Victoria to the port of Mombasa, thereby ensuring a trade link to India. So as eye-rolling as it was to hear from Sir Beaumont or whatever, that they were trying to save Africa from the Africans, when he mentions that it was also to end slavery, that's not entirely wrong. So Tsavo was routinely crossed by Arab slaver caravans all the way to the slave markets in Mombasa. So in fact, it's probably because of these caravans that the lions became such a problem to begin with. So when the arduous journey would result in like sick slaves, the slavers would simply throw them off the road into the African bush, right? So making them,
my God.
Yeah, making them really easy prey for, wildlife like lions, who then developed a taste for human flesh and blood. So these caravans were literally following this route for centuries. Right. So these lions could have been a problem in this area for a long time.
Well, yeah. I mean, so they get like conditioned into liking a certain kind of taste.
Generations, possibly.
Yeah.
Right. So when this route started to end the caravans, the slavers left, but the lions obviously didn't. And so the bridge they were building was right in the middle of the Tsavo lions' hunting grounds. Another part of the problem was that a lot of the African natives refused to work on the railroad, and so Britain imported thousands of Indian workers to do the job instead. And that's something that the movie actually conveys really well. It would have been easy just to make them all African, right?
Right.
So the Indian workers had no idea, of course, how to work and live in the African bush or protect themselves from the wildlife there. They were quite literally just there to do their job. and not in their worst nightmares did they ever consider that they were being watched.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So they did build those thorn bush fences around the camps, which had been proven to work to keep lions and other wildlife out in other parts of Africa. But for whatever reason, these lions tended to come and go as they pleased. So seemingly almost like magically appear and disappear as if the fences weren't there at all. And this is the moment when the locals actually stopped seeing them as lions, but as supernatural predators or even demons, because they couldn't keep them out like they could in other parts of Africa.
So, I mean, I don't know how much you know about this or not, but like, I assume that these superstitions about these lions were like prevalent in their culture already, or
no, well, people didn't live out here, right? I mean, okay, so they did, but they were like, the problem with this railroad, right, is that it's moving constantly, and there's people spread over about 30 miles working on this thing.
Okay, yeah.
At any given time, and all these isolated little campsites all the way dotted all the way along the way. So a lot of the time when they hear of like this lion attack, by the time they're they get there and another of the lions, or they've circled back and have done another, and so it was very hard. And so these are thousands of workers, and they didn't have guns. Only a couple of the people had guns.
Right.
So, in fact, the scene where Patterson builds his elaborate boxcar trap is also completely true. So after the trap was sprung, the lion flew into a rage and started smashing into the bars and walls. So the lion was so aggressive that the hunters couldn't even manage to hit him, obviously just like the movie. So one of the Indians in the trap actually lost his hearing due to the lion's roar. And they show that in the movie, him holding his ears when the lion roars, but he actually, in reality, actually lost his hearing when that happened.
Oh my God, that's crazy.
Yeah. So obviously one of the bullets eventually hit the lock on the door and the lion managed to escape. So all of that's true.
Holy shit.
Exactly how it happened in the film. So
it's got to be fucking terrifying.
Yes. So when Patterson noticed the lion tracks outside of the hospital, he did actually construct a new one and set up the old as a trap and spilled that blood and the bits of animal flesh around. But just like in the movie, the lion circled back to the new hospital and attacked it instead. So that's completely true as well. How horrifying is that?
That's also incredibly horrifying. But so when you say Patton, where does Remington fit into all this?
I'll get to that in a second, right?
Okay.
So yeah, the inaccuracies of the film are more about the characters rather than what actually happened. So, for example, Michael Douglas's character, Remington, is totally made up.
Why? Why would they put his character in that movie?
I'm telling you, like to do that function, that Western function, right? To give, American audiences someone to put themselves into, I guess, if Patterson wasn't already doing that. So in reality, Patterson, with his hunting and experience, had to hunt these lions virtually alone.
That's a much better story. I'm sorry. Like, all due respect to that character, which I did like, a little bit. I think I would have rather seen Val Kilmer's character, like, just become a better hunter and become more like Ahab, you know what I mean? Like, I've got to kill these creatures for whatever reason.
Well, yeah. And in that cave scene, like they literally could have given that scene to Samuel, the Kenyan foreman, yes. and had him say that lions aren't like this, But yeah, the only inaccuracy I could find about the lions is that the male lions in Tsavo are actually maneless. So Tsavo lions have increased testosterone, accounting for their lack of manes, as well as an increased size and aggressiveness compared to the other African lions. So when Patterson finally shot and killed the real lions, they were measured to be about 9 feet in length.
So when he talks about the lions being on display in a museum, is that
it's
true?
Completely true.
Oh, we have to make a pilgrimage.
Yeah. So many historians and academics have been skeptical about the memoirs of Patterson and the eyewitness accounts, believing them to be exaggerated and embellished. Nevertheless, scientists recently took hair samples of the lions who are on display at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, just like the film says, and analyzed their chemical composition to determine how many people they actually ate in the last 3 months of their lives. The research concluded that one lion ate at least 11 people and the other ate at least 24.
Oh my God.
This doesn't include the victims they killed and didn't digest, right? So again, that was just to confirm the number they ate during the last 3 months of their lives rather than the whole ordeal, which was 9 or 10 months. Fucking terrifying.
That's insane is what that is. I mean, like, seriously, we spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about things that are supernatural or things that probably could never happen in real life, ghosts and monsters and things like this. But real fucking monsters, I mean, that is horrifying. My God.
So some unbelievable events weren't even depicted in the movie. So during the man-eater scourge at Savo, one young engineer was killed when a lion leapt through a screen window and into the railway carriage in which he had been sleeping. The lion dragged the body away and was found the next morning. So this specially built railway carriage, which had many of the luxuries now common in recreational vehicles, can be seen in the Railway Museum in Nairobi. Visitors can board the carriage and sit on the refitted bed where the engineer was attacked and killed. Until the early 80s, it was maintained in the dark green livery of the man-eater period, and it had a plaque beneath the window through which the lion had entered.
Oh my God.
As a side note, this is the exact railway car repainted in the turn of the century beige livery that was used by Meryl Streep in the opening railway scenes from the film Out of Africa in 1985. That wasn't in the film. It's like a lion literally leaped into a train window through a screen, ripped a guy out, and killed him.
That is fucking insane. I love it.
So, like, it just comes back to, like, Roger Ebert, you know, saying, like, oh, Tarzan's more believable. It's like, man, if you did your homework, not only did it actually happen, but more shit that's unbelievable actually happened.
So, I mean, like, do you think they should have played that up in the marketing too then? Just, like, really hype up this is a true story?
I don't know. I mean, maybe I need to look up some posters or something. They say it in the opening you know, there's a narrator at the beginning and the end that's talking about how this actually happened. He even says you can go view them in the museum in Chicago. You know, and he says all that, but it's like, it's not, you'd expect almost like a title card at the end to say this all actually happened and blah, 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 blah. Or you'd expect to see based on a true story somewhere or something.
I mean, I would think you'd put it like right in the center of the fucking poster, because we get movies often that are like loosely based on real events that will claim the entire thing is based on real events, right? And here we have a movie that really, aside from one character, is a true story, right? A true horrifying story. And they really don't play up that fact at all, right?
Yeah. And for whatever reason, they chose not to, you know, and I feel like that in hindsight, at least, that's a mistake.
Agreed.
You know, maybe people, I don't know, maybe if they did it, maybe they test audience, you know, and people were just like, no, how could this be possibly true? So they just like took some of that stuff out and just left it for the narration. I don't know.
Oh, screw you guys, man, because that's crazy. I love that's an amazing story.
So
have you read this book?
No, but at the end of the day, is it believable that two lions worked together to hunt and kill humans for pleasure? Nothing like that situation has ever been recorded before or since, but it all seems to be historically accurate.
I mean, I'm sure that animals, just like human beings, get pissed off about shit, right? And if you have already grown accustomed to the taste of human flesh and you got all these people around you encroaching on your land, of course, you're going to do some of it for fun.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
So I can end with one fun fact.
Okay.
There is only one scene involving an animatronic lion. All the other shots were used actually with two real life lions, one named Caesar and the other named Mr. Bongo.
Mr. Bongo?
Bongo.
What the hell was that dog from
Cabin
Fever? Yeah.
It was like Mondo or Bongo, something like that, right?
Yeah. Dr. Mondo. Hey, Dr. Mondo.
Yeah, so Mr. Bongo. Yeah. But the same lines also appeared in the film George of the Jungle from 1997.
Which I also haven't seen.
Mr. Bongo.
Mr. Bongo.
Yeah, so that's the reason why I really requested us to up this film in our schedule. Because I just had learned how historically accurate it was and it just shocked the fuck out of me. I couldn't believe it.
I sort of I didn't really know it was based on a true story until you had mentioned it.
And it makes it that much more visceral and terrifying watching it to me.
It really does. I mean, it really puts it up there in horror pantheon, and I love that. I mean, for a piece of history that I think most people just obviously don't know. I think many people haven't seen this movie and they don't know this piece of history. So that's shocking and incredible. So, but like every movie that we cover here on the Film Flamers, we are going to ask a series of questions. And the first one will be, like always, is The Ghost in the Darkness a horror movie?
You know, I want to say that it's actually a lot closer to a horror movie than a lot of the horror adjacent movies that we cover.
I would agree.
So, yeah.
I mean, so this month alone, we've talked about The Witches of Eastwick, which we have said is genre bending, just like this particular movie is too. But I think this one really crosses the horror line a lot easier and more often than The Witches of Eastwick does. Yeah. Right? I'm kind of glad that we did both these two movies at the same time because it's a really good conversation to have about horror adjacency.
And genre, yeah.
And so we talk about horror adjacency and genre bending movies, but like which genre are you going to lean more into? Like obviously that one leaned into comedy and some fantasy, and this one leans into some action and adventure. But I would say for the greater part of this movie, we are subjected to watching lions kill people, which we learn for fun, right? And we get to see some really shocking moments. And I think that it's like a humbling realization that like horror is all around you, you know, depending on where you live, right? And to what can possibly be there. And like wildlife itself can be horrifying.
But that's an interesting point, right? Because I feel like when it comes to historical or period pieces where they're trying to be historically accurate, you know, from anything like The Imitation Game to like Schindler's List or something like that, and it can be different depending on, you know, what the story is from history, right? So the genre is almost incidental. This happened to be a very horrific story from real life, you know, and so it makes for kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? You know, it's sold as like this historical adventure film, but it's really at its heart a horror movie. And
I would say that, like, you know, depending on the different kinds of marketing, right? I mean, like the poster for this movie looks like a horror movie poster to me, right? So we have like Michael Douglas, like obviously aiming a gun and Val Kilmer behind him. And it's just like, it's sort of like shadowed in the background and like it's all red, you know? And so, I mean, like it looks like a horror movie poster. And so I mean, I think clearly that they knew that there were a lot of horror elements in this that people would latch onto, especially horror fans. And let's not forget that William Goldman is no slouch when it comes to horror movies. I mean, he's done many Stephen King adaptations, including Misery and like Dreamcatcher. I think he also wrote the screenplay for the Stepford Wives. I mean, like he has immersed himself into that particular genre.
It's also produced by Gail Ann Hurd, which we hadn't mentioned yet. And she, of course, produced things like The Terminator and Aliens, Tremors.
But the director has, I mean, he did a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. I forget which one. I mean, it's after 3. So, but I mean, like there's horror cred all over this.
Yeah, he did The Dream Child.
5. Okay. I think he also did The Predator, right? Or one of them.
He did Predator 2.
I mean, horror. So there's horror all over the making of this movie. So secondly, were you scared while watching The Ghost in the Darkness?
Yes, actually. I think I was scared. What?
Nothing. That was very animated.
I'm excited because I'm almost never scared by the movies we watch. Maybe because I've seen them too many times or you know what, but you know, it's been so long since I've seen this. And then of course I hyped myself up by reading all the history. So I think I was in, you know, there's some scenes, you know, in this film that are terrifying.
And I agree. I mean, like I was sort of like expecting more like a period movie and less than a horror, you know? I mean, I knew there were going to be some horror in it. Otherwise, you know, we wouldn't have chose it for this podcast, but I wasn't expecting like the level of violence that these lions were causing. And like and there was plenty of gore in this movie, right? But very subtly, you know, just enough to make each kill shocking every single time
in its own way.
Yeah. And so I think that there's good jump scares in this movie, like that fucking owl. I swear to God, I was just sitting there and I was watching this in the middle of the day and that owl like screeched up on him and I was like, like screamed.
Yeah. I jumped with the stupid owl. And then he falls off. Like I expected him to like be like one of the lions to like crash into the sticks or something, but no, it's the stupid owl that starts like flying by his head and he falls off the thing.
I mean, cause all those 3 guys are in that boxcar and they're like behind that gate and the lion's crashing into it and we can see the nails popping out, but no, it's the owl that makes him fall off that trap, but it's effective and it's an effective jump scare. So as long as they work, put them in movies as far as I'm concerned. All right. So out of 5 stars, what would you rate The Ghost in the Darkness?
You know, I'm just because of like the surprising, like if I had just watched this movie again without actual knowing the history and stuff, I'd probably give it a 3.5. But knowing how historically accurate it is, I kind of want to give it a 4. Plus I, you know, rediscovered Jerry Goldsmith's score and I love Jerry Goldsmith and I just can't believe I had never really listened to the score. And I did listen to it in isolation after I watched the movie and I was just like, wow, you know, so I want to give it a 4 just for shiggles.
I'm going to go 3.5 just because I liked the movie. I thought that it was fun. Like, I enjoyed myself watching it, and I always take into account rewatchability, and I would totally see myself watching this again, you know. And I love that when, you know, there's a movie from back in like what I would consider like my heyday, right? My teenage years that I missed along the way. And I'm like, there has to have been a reason why I didn't watch this movie. And then you watch it and you're like, no, teenage self, I was completely wrong. You should have went and seen this in the theater. You would have enjoyed it. Like, stop being such a fucking snob about shit and just watch movies, you know? And it's good. It's enjoyable. I think that if you have not seen this movie, coming from someone watching it for the very first time, go watch it. It's good. 3.5 for sure.
I'm just now looking at the poster, and it says the tagline is "Pray for the Hunters."
See, horror all over the place. Pray like Pray or Prey?
It's Prey. So I'm actually looking up the full size because there's another tagline on there that I can't read. Only the most incredible parts of the story are true. That's the second tagline.
Not the boring parts?
Yes. Only the most incredible parts of the story are true.
Well, it must have been so small that no one saw that. So finally, and some would say most important, who's the hottest guy in The Ghost in the Darkness?
I'm just going to be boring and say Val Kilmer.
It's obviously Val Kilmer. I'm sorry. That man is like, he's very attractive. He's an attractive movie star looking guy.
Yeah.
You know? And he looks handsome and lovable. So I'm going to go with that. Although that one guy who killed the lion with his bare hands, right? Was surprisingly ripped, and I was just like, I did not expect that level of body, and I was just like, thank God he had his shirt off, because that really made the movie worth watching too.
And delicious for the lion. I can't make jokes like that because I have to keep reminding myself this shit actually happened.
Yeah. That ripped man actually died, Chris.
Fuck.
Well, I think that just about wraps up our conversation on The Ghost in the Darkness. I finally learned to say it right all through the recording of this podcast, at least when Chris edits it. Guys, let us know what you think of this movie. If you've seen it, what you think about our conversation about it, you can do that on social media at The Film Flamers on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and you can find us on Letterboxd.
And you can email us at tiredqueens@filmflamers.com or call us on our hotline at 972-666-7733. Leave us a voicemail. We'll play it on the next Shooting the Flames episode and respond to it.
We also like to call out our new patrons and reviews on Shooting the Flames. So if you're listening to this podcast on Apple or iTunes, go over and give us a 5-star review, a little snippet about why you like us. We'll read that on the episode. And head over to patreon.com/thefilmflamers to find all of our bonus content and episodes like this one out sometimes weeks early for as little as $2.
Yeah. So this month we'll actually be going over Doctor Strange.
That's right. That's the flashback.
Over on Patreon. Mm-hmm.
Your flashback choice this month, right? I haven't seen it, so I'm looking forward to it. I think most of our listeners know that I'm not the biggest like Marvel or comic book fan, but you've like hyped this movie up so much that I kind of know I'm going to like it, though. I mean, like, on paper, it's the one that I was going to like anyway.
Well, especially with your newfound love of Tilda Swinton that I finally won you over.
And I do love Tilda now. I know. I'm so excited. So, actually, when we're done recording this, I'm going to watch that. So that's coming up. But we also have a lot of stuff coming out next month for you guys. In addition to our Shooting the Flames, we are going to be covering a gay horror comedy called
Psycho Beach Party.
So June is Pride Month, and we like to find some of those gay twinged horror films to watch and digest, and we're looking forward to digesting that one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God, the tones of that word are terrible. I don't know why I said that. Digest. Maybe because we're talking about fucking lions eating people. I don't know. It's like pervaded my mind. Well, guys, as always, we appreciate the listens and support, but it's time for Chris and I to go off into the dark jungle. So until our next episode.
The flavors sleep tonight.
dreams. You know, watching this movie, I had the song Africa by Toto stuck in my head for a lot of it, you know? And so it's just like, I bless the rains down in Africa, until they started building the bridge, and then I had Love Can Build a Bridge by the Judds stuck in my head. It was a whole like gamut of emotions sonically that was not being played in the movie. So this is where my brain just does.
Well,
yeah, it's going to take a lot to drag me away from you. Bye.